So I'm going to introduce Parami. Can you hear me, Parami? Yep, great. So I'm going to introduce Parami. We spoke last night, Parami and we've been getting to know each other for just over a year now, I think. And actually, I did feel like a stalker at one time because I was chasing her around, asking if she would consider being president of the Brighton Buddhist Centre after Ratnaprabha stepped down. And I confided in her, we're getting to know each other, which is lovely. And I confided in her last night that I was quite anxious about today, and that one of my deep sanskaras is the fear of dropping the balls. You know, and she said to me, "Well, if you don't drop the balls, darling, you'll never see them bounce." And I thought, so I think that's the basis of our relationship, actually, which is ongoing. So, Parami, our kind of recent president, and we're also, grateful that she took up this post because Parami is an incredibly busy woman. She's incredibly busy and has such a lot of responsibility. And she's joining us from Glasgow today because she's at the moment the interim chair of Glasgow, as well as being president of Edinburgh Buddhist Centre and president of Valencia Buddhist Centre. I don't want to embarrass her, and president of of the Buddhist Centre Online, and private public preceptor on the council, and was one of the founding members of the International Council, for which she has a great love. And getting to know Parami has, as I've said, been a pleasure. She is a woman of great depth, and she's radical. I love her radical nature. And she celebrated her 44th order birthday a couple of weeks ago, I think. And she also said to me that she may have beaten Yashadeva as being the youngest order member, but probably you are the youngest order member to be ordained in. Maybe you can discuss it now.
Definitely Yashadeva beat me. He was only 18 or 19 or something ridiculous when he got ordained.
26.
I was quite old when I got ordained. I was 28.
Yeah, there you
In
go.
those days, that was quite old.
So just before I hand over to you, Parami, I just wanted to say, one other thing, that you're branch secretary of your local SNP as well. So I don't know.
No, I'm not branch secretary. I'm the communications officer.
Okay. Well, I think you better sharpen your act up there.
Yeah, well, let's not discuss that today. The other string to my bow.
So I'm going to hand over to you, Parami, and
thanks.
Parami.
I have to say that one of the reasons why I agreed to become president of the Brighton Buddhist Centre was Maitri Darshan. Just getting to know him a little bit and seeing him around and hearing the very good press that he got from good friends of mine like Abhaya Kirti and Dhamma Megha were clinchers, really. So far, so good. I get a holiday by the seaside maybe once a year. So anyway, I just wanted to say how delightful it is that I'm able to zoom in today. It would have been lovely to be there. I would have really liked to come, but there's just so much going on up here in Glasgow in the Buddhist Centre at the moment. We're just in the throes of purchasing a new property, having sold the Sucky Hall Street Centre, which some of you, I'm sure, would remember. So it's all quite busy. Like, you just think, go and buy a Buddhist Centre. Yeah, well, as many of you know, it doesn't quite work like that. There's all sorts of things to wrangle. So that's what we're in the middle of at the moment. And we've got quite a few meetings coming up. So a wee trip down to Brighton was just sadly not possible. So yeah, I've been chatting a bit to Maitri Darshan about this event. Well, since I was down in September, and also we've had a couple of phone calls now about it. And he said, we'd start off by telling us what you were doing 50 years ago. And so I've been trying to dredge my memory. So I was 22, 52 years ago. And I was at that point, I was trying to work it out because you know what they say about the 60s, if you remember it, you weren't there. Well, the 70s are a bit similar in my case. So I get a bit confused by the timeline. But I think I would have been living in Glasgow at that point. I moved to Jersey in 1975. So in 74, I would have been living in Glasgow. I was singing in pubs. That was my second job. By day, I was a librarian, and by night, I was a cabaret singer, male pubs and clubs. And I was a member of the Communist Party. And I was very heavily involved in sex and drugs and rock and roll, as were so many of my friends in the order from that time. So yeah, I was living in Glasgow and just basically making a right mess in my life. So I was also very glad when I came across the Glasgow Buddhist Centre in 1977, so a few years later. So yeah, memories of Brighton, that was another thing because I got involved in Glasgow. It's quite a long way away from Brighton. But at that time, there weren't actually that many Buddhist centres around the UK, and we all knew each other. So I was remembering that when I used to go and retreat, well, all the women mitras from the whole of the UK would be in the same retreat. And my memory is that there would be people from Brighton, mainly, I remember Brighton, West London. The LBC hadn't opened at that point. It was still they were still in the building site at that point. And I remember some of those mitras quite well. And I tell you, one that stands out that I became very chummy with was Lois Paul, who some of you will know as Suchita. And we teamed up quite a lot. And one of my early memories is we both had long curly hair. And we used to wear it in bunches. Do you remember bunches? They'd kind of like come out from here. And we were being very silly and giggly. We were being our early mid-20s. She's a bit younger than me. And I remember in a retreat that was being led by Damadina that she pulled us away and said, "Grow up, you two. Wearing your hair in bunches does not help." It was quite a wake-up call. And anyway, Lois and I, as she was, we carried on being quite good pals. She went off to America for a while to do a music therapy course, and we used to correspond and tell each other about what was happening. Yeah, so then I moved down to London to the what became the LBC in 1978. But between getting involved at the end of 77 and the summer of 78, I used to hitchhike down to the women's community at Amaravati for day retreats. So I'd leave my job in Glasgow Uni Library, I'd hitchhike down to London. These were the 70s. And I'd hitchhike sometimes through the night, usually in great big trucks that were doing the overnight run from Glasgow to London. And then I would go straight to the retreat or whatever was happening in the women's community for the day. Saturday night, I'd go out because I still had friends from when I'd sung in pubs and clubs who lived in London. So I usually knew a good party or two. And then, so I'd stay out most of the night on the Saturday night, go back to the women's community on the Sunday for the second bit of the day and hitchhike back up to Glasgow and go to work on the Monday. So I was young and had a lot of energy. And there would always be people from mainly Brighton, Croydon, West London in my memory. And then I got ordained in 1980, and I want to show you if I can just share on the screen. You might wonder why I'm sharing this, but I will explain it. So let's see if I can just share a photograph of my ordination. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, now you might wonder why I'm sharing this with you, but do you see that outfit? Let me see, there should be another photograph of it as well that shows it a bit more. Oops, that's all my SNP propaganda. You don't need to see that. So you see that it's a pair of dungarees and it's the kind of hippie. Well, that came from the shop in Brighton. That's why I wanted to share it. So let's see if I can get rid of that now. So you used to have a shop was it in King's Street, King's Road, Queen's Road?
George Street.
Yeah, that's right. It was George Street. Anyway, that outfit was purchased for me by my friend Lois Paul to wear at my ordination. So my relationship with Brighton goes right back to my ordination. And then another thing that I was remembering was when we used to do the big, well, they still do them. They do them at Addistana now, but the great big LBC twice a year big open retreats, which we used to do on the south coast, actually. First of all in Seaford, in a school in Seaford, and then a school in Battle. So they became known as the Battle Retreats, which kind of slightly amusing. But those retreats initially were kind of aimed at people from the LBC, West London, Croydon, and Brighton. And the wonderful Surita, from who was in Brighton at that time, was our yoga teacher on the first, I don't know how many of those retreats we did them on. And Surita plays a big part in my early life in the movement and the order. I remember on the very, very first of those retreats in 1979, no, 1980, summer 1980. So I was a mitra and I was in the kitchen with Samata and somebody else. We were all mitras. Anyway, we were running the kitchen on this retreat. Surita was part of the order team and he was teaching yoga. And in the middle of this retreat, I had a bit of a breakdown because I had this very strong memory of something that happened in my life and where I'd been quite unskillful. And I decided I couldn't possibly be ordained because this was so awful. So there was a phone box in the school in Seaford. So I went and I phoned Padmaloka and asked to speak to Bante. I mean, the cheek of it, really, when you think about it. Anyway, he very kindly came to the telephone and I sobbed down the phone and said, "Oh, I've just remembered this thing and it was awful. And I think I need to withdraw my ordination request because you wouldn't want somebody like this in the order." And he was sort of very sympathetic and he said, "My suggestion is you go and find somebody," because I said where I was, "you go and find somebody in the team to talk to." And I said, "I can't talk to anybody, we're in silence." And he said, "Well, you're talking to me," which was a good point. And so I left the room, and the first person that I saw was the wonderful Surita. And I said to him, "Surita, I've just remembered this thing that happened with my mother." He took me for a walk round the gardens for about an hour, by the end of which I felt much better. So that was an important moment for me. And I got ordained 2 months later or something. So there you go. It was quite a big moment. So yeah, so Brighton's always been really on the kind of the radar. It was one of the earliest centres, I believe. And I imagine you'll hear more about that as the days go on. And then in the 80s, of course, when I was remembering being in Glasgow in the 70s, one of the things that came to my mind was that I was attempting to be normal, at least normal within certain parameters. I could never claim to be completely normal, but I was attempting to be sexually normal. I was attempting to be heterosexual. I wasn't actually very good at it. So by the mid 80s, I'd given up on that and had kind of come out, I suppose. I went through a phase of saying I'm bisexual because I thought that's what good Buddhists would do. But then I kind of came out and realised I wasn't bisexual at all. So of course, then Brighton started to play a slightly different part in my life because I was living at the LBC. I had a girlfriend, and we used to come down to Brighton quite regularly for weekends. And we used to come to Brighton Pride. So that was another little bit of my relationship with Brighton. And on a more serious note, one of the other things I remember from the probably late 80s, I was working as an HIV counsellor by that point in the Terence Higgins Trust in London. And I started to do death and loss and bereavement workshops. And can't remember quite why, and I can't remember who would have been chairing the centre at that time in Brighton. So it would have been like the late 80s. So it was probably pre Cayman Andy. Anyway, whoever it was very kindly agreed to me coming to the centre to do some workshops on loss and bereavement. And they were pretty strong workshops, and I made some friends from that time, probably most notably Gambiradi, who at that point was Sally and came along to one of the first workshops that I ever led. And we formed a very strong bond actually through her participation with her then partner, who was in fact dying. So it was quite a strong kind of bond. And then there were others. There was also I was public preceptor to, oh gosh, the one that was the deputy head of Rodean and died not that long after her public ordination. She was
Okay.
Belinda before she got ordained. So I can see some people nodding their head. They'll remember who I mean. Satya
Shri.
Shri, that's right. Who I loved to pieces, actually. She was just such a character. And I think that was one of the things that I quite liked about the folk that I knew in Brighton. There were quite a lot of characters around at the time. There was Vasandra, who was a bit of a character. There was Sangaloka, definitely a bit of a character. Vidyashri moved into Brighton at some point while I was still at the LBC. So I always had friends around Brighton and I always enjoyed coming to visit. And then another very strong bond that I made during that time, a bit no later in the 90s, was when I became chair of the Valencia Buddhist Centre in Spain. And the chair of the Brighton Buddhist Centre at that point was Cayman Andy. And I can't see Cayman Andy, but I imagine she's in the room somewhere. Oh, hello, hi. And at that point, my memory is that there were only 3 women chairs of public Buddhist centres. There was Cayman Andy from Brighton. There was Kaymasiri rather, from Amsterdam, and myself from Valencia. And there were a couple of other women in the chairs, what's now the ECA, the Chairs Assembly. At that time, there was Vijayashree came a bit later from Croydon, but there was probably Diane Andy from Taraloka. And that was about it. I mean, it was at that point, it was a lot of men and the 3 of us or the 4 of us or whatever. And we used to often share a room. And I've got great memories of absolute hysteria sometimes. And one of my memories as well is that at that one point we used to use, this is a little bit of maybe not such positive history from Sri Ratna, but we used to use Padmaloka for the chairs assemblies in the summer. We used Dhanakosha in the winter and Padmaloka in the summer. And in Padmaloka, women weren't at that point allowed to sleep over there. So we had to stay in B&Bs dotted around Surlingham and various other places. And at some point a bit later, there were a few more women involved in that. And I remember that there was only myself and Kalyana Vacha, who was at that point chair of Edinburgh, who for some reason we became the drivers. They rented Padmaloka or whoever rented these 2 dead posh cars. It was the first time I'd ever driven a brand new car. And we had to drive around and pick all the women up from the different bed and breakfasts and stuff. It was utterly ridiculous. Anyway, Padmaloka did realise it was ridiculous and it changed in the next meeting. But again, that was quite a strong bond. And I'm not good at keeping up with people when my conditions and circumstances change. So I've never really kept up with Cayman Andy, but I'm always delighted to see her wherever I do see her. And definitely those days were bonding. Okay, I've talked for quite long enough really about the past. So maybe I'll just move on and say a little bit about my hope for you guys for the future. Well, for the future. Talking to Maitri Darshan, one of the things I've been really impressed about is the whole desire, the whole decision taken really to the greening of the Brighton Buddhist Centre. I mean, that's something that's very close to my own heart. And I know that there are people in the Brighton Sangha, Shantichitta comes to mind amongst others, who have really been very dedicated for a long time to kind of trying to deal with the ecological crisis. So it's been great to kind of just hear about what's been happening with that. And I'm told by my tradition that you're now about 80% energy independent in the building of the Buddha Centre. That's amazing. And in fact, when I told the council here in Glasgow, we want to beat yous. So we're going to have a go at becoming very good. Wait, this place that we're looking at, one of the things we're working about at the moment is trying to actually get the energy certificate for it. But so I think it's great what you've done with the solar panels, what you've done with, or just the whole kind of project of trying to make the Buddhist Centre much more in line with those values. So I just really wish you well with that. And another thing that my Darshan mentioned to me, I think maybe even at the very beginning when we were talking about whether I would become president or not, was that he said that for him, one of the things that he found he would like about me being chair of the, sorry, not chair. No. I have enough on my plate with that. President of the centre in Brighton, was that he wanted to find a way of tuning in more strongly to the international movement. Any medium to big size Buddhist centre within Sri Ratna, I think it's very easy to become a bubble or to become almost your own world. It's not totally like that, of course, because people go in retreats and they meet other people. You know, once you're ordained, you're in conventions, you're meeting other people. But in terms of what a Buddhist centre offers to the world, I think it can become quite self-contained. You know, it's no bad thing that you've got the resources to do that. But I think there is something important about remembering that we are an international order and an international community. And so that's something that I'm hoping that we can think a bit more about, talk a bit more about. You know, you've already got me from Glasgow, which is another country, if I may just mention that. And I can see Tara giggling in the background because she and I have had many conversations over the years about my views on Scottish independence. Anyway, so I got distracted there. Yeah, so I'm hoping that that's something that I can offer to you as your president, because that has been a big part in my own connection within Sri Ratna. I've held quite a lot of international based kind of responsibilities. And I love that. I do really, I find that one of the most inspiring things that we've got to offer the world. And I think one of the things I find really fascinating about it is almost a philosophical question, although it's got very strong practical implications. And that's to do with what is the kind of essence of what we're offering and what needs to be adapted to different cultures. I find that absolutely fascinating. And even within a culture like the UK, there's separate culture. I mean, Brighton's a very different culture from, say, Ipswich or somewhere, you know, not just in size, but in all sorts of different ways. Glasgow's a very different culture from, I don't know, I was going to say Liverpool, but actually I don't think that's totally true. I think there's probably quite a lot of similarities. But, you know, there'll be cultural specificities even to an urban city centre, but also in terms of the kind of overall area of the UK and its relationships, similarities and differences with, say, with the USA or with Australia, with India, all those different kind of areas that we're part of. And it's such a rich tapestry, and it's something that I think feeds everybody's practice, really, if we can be open to that. So that's something I'd like to say that I hope I can offer to the Brighton Sangha, is maybe a little bit of an international flavour. So hopefully that will be the case. And yeah, I'll just finish by saying 50 years is a long time in the kind of lifespan of an individual. And as Mai Darshan said, many of you probably weren't even born in 1974. But 50 years is nothing in the kind of life of a movement or a community or a religious entity. It's absolutely nothing. It's a drop in the ocean. And I really, really hope that we've got a lot more drops in the ocean to kind of come, that we've got a lot more to offer the world. And, I look around at the world. At the moment, I'm finding the world situation extremely challenging. If I hadn't met the Dharma, I really don't know where I'd be or what I'd be doing or how I'd be feeling at the moment. Every morning, the news cycle's got something new in it, some new country that's been invaded or that's invaded somewhere else. It just feels like it's so on fire. And, at the end of the day, I do believe that the Dharma is probably really the only thing that can quench that fire, even if it's only a matter of quenching it individually and quenching it in terms of the small areas of influence that we find ourselves taking. So here's to another 50 years that hopefully some of you in the room will see. Quite a few of us definitely won't see it. But, I hope whether we see it or not, that the legacy that we leave is a legacy that benefits future generations. Just to finish where we anecdote, the other night we have a new order member who just come back from her ordination retreat. She was ordained down at Tiratnaloka on the 2-week retreat. Padma Pragna, her name is. Anyway, she'd just come back. So she'd been ordained 2 weeks. But Varochana, who many of you know, was just about to have his 50th order birthday. So we had an evening celebrating the two of them. And I did a little interview conversation with the two of them and asked them all sorts of questions. And what I really wanted to pull out was how much things have changed in 50 years, but also how much has not changed. And what came through very strongly was that even though Banti died in 2018, so whatever that is, years ago, around now, actually, we're coming up to the anniversary of his death. He still had such a strong influence. So the new order member had never actually met Banti. Well, she'd met him once in a group situation. Barochana, on the other hand, had not only been ordained by Banti, but talked about how Banti would come and spend 3 weeks in Glasgow and lead study with all the people that were involved and stuff. And I just thought, the changes, you can't predict change. But Banti said somewhere that the only thing you couldn't change was the heart of everything, which is the going for refuge. And, I really hope that in 50 years' time, there's another group of people sitting either in this room or in some other room, and they're rejoicing in the fact that so much has changed in 100 years. And yet, still at the heart of things, there's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and Bhante Sangharakshita's teaching. So here's to another 50 years. Give us some fireworks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parami. Thank you for your time, and thanks for zooming in on Brighton here. And I can't get the image of you with bunches out of my head. And thanks for that really sort of the insight into the past and those really profound thoughts about the present and the future. So thank you very much, Parami. Thank you. I know you're going to be leaving us pretty much imminently. So we're going to have a comfort break, is it called now? Or tea break? Outbreak.
Bio break.
Yeah, so thank you once again, Parami. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and have a fabulous time for the rest of the weekend. I mean, I'm sorry to miss, well, a lot of it, the Sandra, Ratnaprabha, but I'm really sorry to miss the conversation with the ex-chairs.
Yeah, which is
I'd really like to have I'd like to be a fly in the wall for that one. So
but
yeah, go well.
We're recording it.
Oh, great. I look forward to that.
Yeah.
And lovely to see some of you again, Vasantra, all sorts of people. Hello. Oh, my past. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Parami. Thank you.
Okay, I shall love yous and leave yous.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah.